Welcome, everyone. We'll get the session started. You are in a session on coordinating rural water investments to achieve security and stability. I'm Ranjiv Kush, the project director for the USAID Rural Evidence and Learning for Water, or Real Water, Applied Research Program, which is one of the co-conveners of this session. I think to get us started, I just have three responsibilities in front of me. And the first one is to acknowledge our other session co-conveners, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, Charity Water, Inter-American Development Bank, and UNICEF. So thanks to everybody for all of the effort that you've put in to getting this session together. My next responsibility is to say one word about logistics. This session does run through 5:30, so if you think you have to leave early, I'll ask if you could maybe be situated in the back, just to not interrupt the flow too much. That would be great. And then my third responsibility, and this is to embarrass the USAID Global Water Coordinator, Nancy Eslick, who has graciously offered to open today's session. Now, I actually did not misspeak when I said embarrass. Because if you know Nancy, she's pretty to the point, and her instructions were to keep this short so that we can get on with business. But honestly, for me, that is a hard thing to do when I review Nancy's resume. So sorry, Nancy, but I have to make a few points that illustrate why your position as the Global Water Coordinator at USAID is important for the sector. So 3 things. I'm going to start with experience. So over the last 20 years, Nancy has served as USAID Mission Director in Cambodia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Jordan. And I will note that Jordan is the focus of one of USAID's largest development programs. She has also served in Burma, Pakistan, Uganda, and Afghanistan. Impressive. But there's also training. Nancy holds a master's degree in public policy with a focus on water resources, which I think is obviously important for her position. And this is from the Indiana University in Bloomington in the US. And she also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda. Finally, rank. And I didn't know how to really how to say this position. But Nancy is a senior deputy assistant to the administrator. And I think anyone who's spent time in the US government knows the importance of having people at high positions in order to move the agenda, and in particular to, in this case, lead USAID's implementation responsibilities under the Global Water Strategy. So with that, Nancy, I'll stop now. Hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rajiv. I really appreciate it. And yes, I did say keep it short, because the whole point of World Water Week and sessions like this is to really hear from people and listen. So I'll have a few opening remarks. I'm excited to listen to the panels. I'm excited to listen to my co-opener from one of my very favorite countries, Uganda, the Minister of Environment and Water. And out of all of that Rajiv said, I have to say the best job of my entire career is the one I have right now, and that's as USAID's Global Water Coordinator, a steward over $450 million of US taxpayer money, with the purpose of really helping overseas to provide access to water, sanitation, increase partnerships, and mobilize non-US government money. So thanks, everybody. I'm Nancy Eslick. And as many of you know, USAID invests in WASH and water resource-related activities globally. To ensure maximum impact and long-term sustainability of our investments, a core principle of our engagement is to collaborate with government leaders at all levels to improve service delivery and water resource management happens because of this coordination. Based on this, I'm thrilled that today's session is focused on stakeholder coordination for rural water supply. On behalf of USAID, we are delighted to co-convene this event. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our co-conveners, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, UNICEF, and Charity Water. As practitioners, many of you have witnessed examples of activities that overlap in terms of geography and objectives. One of the reasons why we coordinate is to prioritize so that these overlapping programs can be eliminated, harmonized, and don't go array with multiple objectives. We're encouraged today that representatives of government agencies, donor groups, and implementing organizations have gathered here today to discuss improved coordination of investments and programs in rural water development. Improved coordination will generate additive, or better, improved synergistic benefits for the populations with whom we work. USAID is guided by our global water strategy, which demonstrates water's centrality to improving health, prosperity, stability, and resilience. We see collectively not only as a secondary aspect of our success, but as a core determining factor. What is this? This is collaboration. Indeed, the need to work in partnership is explicitly called out in our global water strategy as an operational principle to work through and strengthen global, national, and local systems. For example, in Stockholm today, I didn't come via DC, I came via Kinshasa, where I am so proud to talk about a partnership we just launched with the Federal Republic of Germany and to accelerate access to water infrastructure and services. We're doing this hand in hand with Germany and the Democratic Republic of Congo, rather than to procure our own separate projects. We intentionally chose to work in partnership with the Germans to leverage their existing efforts with 20 years of experience on the ground, and with a water utility operator, FCDO, that is effective and with good leadership, making great changes for DRC implementation. So partnership is one of the keys that I really prioritize as the Global Water Coordinator. So let's talk about USAID's Global Water Strategy Action Initiative. It's a multi-million-dollar investment in water security, sanitation, and hygiene action research. It's highly practical research. It's designed to benefit the effectiveness of our investments made by USAID, partner governments, and other funders and practitioners. Real Water, which Rajiv and Akwaya implement, is one of our core investments under the Global Water Strategy Action Research Initiative. Based on our findings to date, we continue to see that coordination is central to effective development and security programming. This was evident in Real Water's recent assessment on rural water supply in Madagascar and in West Africa, where a critical gap was information sharing between donors. Based on this, USAID is committed to improving coordination and thrilled to gather here today alongside all of you, alongside governments, development partners, implementers, to do just this, talk about coordination and then put it into action. So I'm looking forward to participating today, learning from this critical dialogue, but most of all, I just want to thank all of you for making the time to come and listen, to learn with us, and contribute. So appreciate it, and I very much look forward to the dialogues today.
Thank you, Nancy. So we'll move on to the program. Okay, good. So we have our agenda slide up. Everyone can see that we'll start with the presentation. I'll be making an introduction to Lillian Idrakua, our next speaker from the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, following Lillian's perspective on coordination from a government agency. We'll go to our first panel to discuss experiences of national coordination, what works and why. Follow that with a Q&A, hopefully get some good inputs from all of you, and then move to our next panel, which is going to cover rural water supply as a victim of conflict and an entry point for peace, again, to be concluded with a question and answer session. So that's the agenda. If we could go to the next slide. Yes, we just before this, we do have an audience poll that we're hoping that we can use to get a little bit of input from all of you. So if you could log on to the menti.com site using the QR code or using the code that's on the slide, and consider the 3 questions that are there, it would be very helpful. So please do that as we proceed. And now I'll move on to an introduction of our next speaker, Lillian Idrakua, who I'm very happy and honored to introduce. Lillian is the Commissioner of Water Quality of the Water Quality Management Department of Uganda's Ministry of Water and Environment. Lillian also sits on the Real Water Advisory Board. For about 15 years, I've been showing up in Lillian's office every few years, asking for guidance on various research projects, mostly related to water safety management. Through this period, Lillian's duties and responsibilities have only continued to grow as she has moved to increasingly senior positions within the ministry. But, Lillian has always remained available and thoughtful and a great colleague for me. So I'm personally grateful. I am thankful that she agreed to get our discussion going with, again, an overview of WASH sector coordination in Uganda. And also particularly, Lillian, because I know you only arrived in Stockholm a few hours ago. So thanks so much for making this effort.
Everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ranjiv, for that introduction. I want to be able to look at the slide. Oh, this one, yeah, wonderful. Maybe the table is okay. Yeah. So, I've already been introduced. Next slide, please. Yeah, so until 2020, that's the framework for WASH coordination in Uganda. The Uganda government has been taking lead in coordination of WASH in Uganda. And at the national level, we've been having the water and environment sector working group that draws membership from the development partners. We have 2 groups of development partners. We have the water supply and sanitation development partner group, and on annual basis, they elect a lead development partner. We also have the environment, natural resource, and climate change development partner group. All these sit, they are part of the water sector working group. Now, under the water sector working group, we have the subsector working groups. We have the subsector working group on water supply and sanitation, the subsector working group on environment and natural resource and climate change. Then under each of the subsector working groups, we have the different groups under different thematic areas. We have the thematic area on climate change, thematic area on finance. We have the thematic area on capacity development. Then we have different committees. We have the committee, maybe importantly for this meeting, we have the committee on sector performance measurement framework. Now, this is at the national level. At the district level, we have the District Water and Sanitation Coordination Group that meets once every quarter. And for all the civil society organizations that come to Uganda, when they go into the districts, they are expected to register with the districts and form part of this district water supply and sanitation group. Next. So the role of the sector working group include approval of work plans, budgets, and reports. It provides guidance on resource allocation. It's responsible for approval of projects. I'm glad Nancy talked about avoiding duplication. So all projects that come to Uganda for WASH have to pass through the sector working group for approval before they're submitted to the Ministry of Finance to undergo the screening processes. So the sector working group is also responsible for coordination of the 2 subsectors I've talked about. And finally, it's responsible for sector performance monitoring. Next. In 2002, Uganda developed the sector performance measurement framework. In this framework, we defined, there are 11, not 10 golden indicators. One of the golden indicators is on access. The proportion of population within 1 kilometer of an improved source for the rural area, but within 200 meters in the urban area. That defines the indicator for access. But we also have an indicator for quality with respect to WASH, and many others, including gender. Now, in 2003, we developed our first sector performance report that formed the basis of the sector performance monitoring. From 2003 to 2019, we carried out the joint sector reviews on annual basis until 2020, and I'm going to explain shortly why we are not calling it sector performance reviews anymore. Next. So that is the process of the sector performance monitoring. It starts with data collection in the local governments, because in Uganda, service delivery has been deconcentrated, decentralized to the districts. So development of WASH, all the boreholes, all the water supplies, funds are sent directly to the districts, and the districts are responsible for development. So they are responsible for the data collection, and they submit this data to the subsectors. So for the analysis, each subsector then nominates a representative to sit on that committee, which I talked about, the Committee for Performance Measurement Committee, that draws membership from the different subsectors. And each subsector is responsible for writing the section of the sector performance report, which many of you could have read. Each subsector is responsible, and that is put together into the sector performance report, which then forms the basis of the joint sector reviews, which is attended by all government agencies, departments, development partner groups, and civil society organizations. During these joint sector reviews, we would come up with 5 to 7 priority strategic actions, which we called undertakings, and this would form the basis for planning and budgeting in the subsequent year. So I said since 2020, government policy has changed. So we no longer hold joint sector reviews. So the sectors have been dismantled a bit, but they are organized into what we call programs. So we have program-based planning and budgeting now. So WASH is no longer, according to this, this framework now, WASH is no longer under the Ministry of Water and Environment, but it forms under a program we call Human Capital Development, where health is and education is. So the rural water supply and sanitation is no longer under Ministry of Water and Environment. The institution itself has remained there. But for purposes of planning and budgeting and the reviews, it now falls under the Human Capital Development Program. And the other thing that has changed is the leadership of the program has moved up to the Office of the Prime Minister, who is now the overall coordinator of all the programs, but the line ministers have remained responsible for their respective ministries, and the permanent secretaries are also the technical leaders for each of the programs. Now, the tasks of the permanent secretaries have remained the same. They chair the program working group. So we no longer call them sector working groups, but they are now program working groups. Now, the civil society organizations are coordinated by an umbrella organization called the Uganda Water and Sanitation Network, UWASNET, that was founded in 2000. And the mandate of UWASNET is to coordinate all the civil society organizations to facilitate learning and sharing, to promote partnerships and collaboration. But UWASNET is also responsible for receiving all the reports from the CSOs, and UWASNET then submits this report to form part of the program sector report. UWASNET also helps to track the funds that come into Uganda through the civil society organizations, the funds that come to Uganda for WASH activities. Next. There are key challenges, of course, when many stakeholders are involved in data collection, and one of the challenges is the data reliability. For those who are following the joint monitoring by UNICEF and WHO, there's normally some disparity between what the government reports and what the GMP reports say with respect to access. But now there's another challenge of incomplete alignment of the indicators to the Sustainable Development Goals. We also are we are experiencing a bit of resource constraints. So the organization of the program reviews is not as vibrant as it used to be when we were organizing the sector reviews. Last but not least, there is a number of civil society organizations who unfortunately are very reluctant in declaring what investments they are receiving for WASH activities. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Lillian. I wish I could say we will make progress on some of the challenges identified in the last slide. Maybe there are some ideas. So I will ask that you hold any questions for Lillian or any feedback, any comments until we get to the Q&A after our first panel, which Jeff will moderate. Oh, sorry. Aline will be moderating.
Okay.
Together.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome once again. So my name is Aline Saraiva-Okello, and I work with the Secretariat of the Rural Water Supply Network. So we have been supporting the preparation of this session. So I'd like to invite now our esteemed, I will be co-moderating with Jeff. Jeff is the Deputy Director of Real Water from the Acquire Institute. So I'd like to invite our first panel to the stage. So first we'll have Vivek Raman from the Asian Development Bank. He's the Principal Development Specialist and Strategy from the Strategy and Partnership Team, Water and Urban Development Sector Office. We'll have also Lisa Ruch from the water sanitation and hygiene. She's water sanitation and hygiene advisor of Global Health Directory of the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO. Then we'll have engineer Robert Kakubia. He was formerly with WASREB in Kenya and is now part also of the Real Water Advisory Board. And we'll have Sarah Nedolast. She's program manager from the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership from the World Bank. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. And Sergio Campos is a Water and Sanitation Division Chief of the Inter-American Development Bank. Thank you so much. So I would like... So we'll not follow exactly the order in which they came up. So I'd like to start my first question to Engineer Gakubia, continuing with the perspective from the government. How is collaboration with national government and other stakeholders managed? You worked many years in the sector in Kenya. You had many partners coming aboard. Can you give us a bit more examples of how this worked in Kenya?
Thank you very much, and thank you for being part of this panel. I want to clarify that I'm no longer with government. I'm retired, so I'm not a sector leader. They are sector leaders. But having worked in the sector for many years, I still have some institution, some memory of the sector, and I'm still active in the sector. That question does not have a straightforward answer, if I could say, because this coordination, cooperation depends on the context. But in our case in Kenya, we had managed to actually bring the sector into an order by the time we started the reforms, and by the time the reforms were almost 10 years old. But then a dynamic came in, and we now had, just like Lilian was saying about program and all that, we now had a two-level system of government. And you can imagine now those are politicians. They kind of just come and decide that they are the panacea of the whole problems in the sector that has been having. So you are now dealing with two levels of government, and you have to coordinate. The good thing is that if you have mandate institutions that know exactly what they need to be doing, that means they also know the goals that they want to meet, then it is not as difficult to coordinate, because you don't just come in with any program or any money just you want to bring. I think you have to align it with what the institution thinks that the sector needs to achieve. So if for some reason then your programs do not actually fit in and they cannot in any way be aligned, then you do not have to, the institution does not have to spend money and time and other resources with you. So it's important to understand that you have a mandate, and that mandate does not depend on how many partners you get out there. You really have to see you really have to kind of decide how you actually deliver that mandate to the citizens of the country. And the advantage I had is because I worked in regulation, I had also worked in policy. So we had prepared the strategies, we had prepared what programs that we need achieved. And one of the biggest programs we had was in how the sector is being managed in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, and there was a real big problem. But there was also civil society actors who were just out there delivering infrastructure. And the problem with the sector was not infrastructure. It had nothing to do with infrastructure. It's really about management of this infrastructure, which the regulator needed to actually put in line and align with all the sector goals. And I think once you now have partners understanding this, the challenge was really whether you have capacity with the local government and even national government to actually deliver and understand and actually deliver the common message. But one of the important things that as a regulator, you're also managing and trying to bring together various disciplines who have different ideas about what should deliver. But as a regulator, then you have to really bring them together. You have an economist who thinks, there are other things that I can't talk about. A public health person, an engineer who only think about infrastructure. So as a regulator, you have to bring this together, especially if you have to talk about sustainability. How do you now deliver sustainable systems if we are all thinking like this? How do we even deliver the same message about, for example, a water tariff? If we all have different ideas of whether water should be paid, is a human right, it is free, all those kind of things, you really have to have somebody who understands why water needs to recover some cost, despite the fact that it's a human right. You can balance all these things. And you need to bring people together, and you bring them by actually being transparent, being accountable about the state of the sector, So for me, it's about transparency and accountability and being very candid about what the problems the sector is facing. It's not about nice things. We leave those to politicians. Is there some pain you have to go through as an institution mandated to deliver some goal? And there are steps towards delivering that goal, and you have to make sure that those steps are actually followed. You may not have the perfect answer, but at least by the time you leave, you want to leave a situation that you actually did something that you are convinced that was perhaps the right way to go at that time in that particular context.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Engineer Gakubia. I want to mention that the slogan for our program is keeping it real. And we knew that we could count on Engineer Gakubia to keep it real rather than hearing platitudes. So thank you, Engineer Gakubia. I wanted to pass the mic over to Sarah Nedelast of the World Bank to speak about a big program in Ethiopia, the Consolidated Water Supply, Sanitation, and Hygiene Account Project, One Wash. If you could tell us about this. It's $350 million program, if I'm not mistaken. Please.
So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the One Wash program as an example of partners coordinating along with a government-led program with innovative financing and planning strategy. So the One Wash program was set up in 2013. It's in its third phase now. And what it really represented is a shift from the government of doing project-by-project planning to taking a more comprehensive approach, looking at a more programmatic, across-sector approach to WASH. It also highlights some alignment and coordination that we've had with the donors and the partners. It can be summarized, or the motto maybe, is one plan, one budget, one report. And so some of the features that this program has, as you had noted, is one is a consolidated account. So this is an account that's managed by the Ministry of Finance. The other ministries, such as Water, Health, Education, and Finance, all tap into this account to implement the WASH activities. Donors pool their funding in this account that the government has. So we've been able to pool funding from the World Bank, from the Africa Development Bank, from the UK, from the Saudi Development Fund, UNICEF, Korea, Finland, and the Netherlands. So they've all been willing to pool their funds into this account in support of the government-led strategy. So what this has resulted in is it's resulted in reduced transaction costs. So the government no longer has to manage multiple donors, multiple reports, multiple meetings to report on progress. There's agreed key performance indicators that are reported on. So there's the level of accountability and there's a level of planning. And there's also a harmonization of the fiduciary and safeguard policies. So this has really helped to reduce transaction costs. It's helped to coordinate the donors on the ground, and it's helped to reduce some of the processing. But what are some of the key factors that we feel has made this work is one is really the government leadership and ownership of the plan. That's been very important. The government developed this plan with full support of the partners, but also with guidance from sector and non-sector leaders from the federal level, regional level, and local level. That was very important in making this work. The collaboration across the key line ministries was also very important. And I would say also the commitment from donors. The commitment to donors to put their funding in a pooled resource has taken, they have a little bit less autonomy over those funds when they do this. So the One WASH program is really serving as a trusted broker for the relationship between the client and from the donors.
Thank you so much. This is very, very interesting, and seeing all this coordination happening in Ethiopia. So I've heard some cases in Africa. Well, I would like to move now to Asia. So Vivek, what lessons would you share from the efforts to align with other water sector donors in your case studies in Asia, in the projects and programs there?
Thank you, and very happy to be here with this esteemed panel. I'm so happy that Asian Development Bank could be a co-convener of this. Robert inspired me. I'm going to get rid of my notes a little bit and try and keep it real. I think three things matter when it comes to coordination, right? And one has been doing this for long enough. And who in this room sits and goes into the field saying, I don't want to coordinate today. I just want to do whatever I want to do. Right? That's not how our day-to-day works. So three things possibly in a quick summary would be that one is leadership matters. right, in coordination. 2, vision matters, to be able to have a vision that says that we want to be able to achieve this as sector planning, coordination, all of that. And lastly, I think quality matters. Right? And there have been several examples where rather than talking, maybe I'll give some of my examples more at the peer-to-peer level. Like we all sit here and we all sometimes get confused that we are sitting in headquarters and not really, sometimes cut off from what's happening at the field. But having been posted at the field myself, there is a close network of development professionals there. Right? A lot of this coordination happens formally and informally. Right? So our example in Vietnam, for example, there is a MDB informal working group with the Big Four. So much knowledge has been shared there. So much coordination happens possibly at a club over a beer. And so one of the examples where ADB had actually wanted to process a loan on city sanitation strategies in Vietnam, and we developed it for 20 provinces. But the loan didn't come through. We didn't say that, oh, let's just keep that in the bag and reserve it for later. The first thing our project team leader did is call the other MDBs and say, look, we've got this data that we're sitting on. Do you want to pick it up? And yes, a few MDBs did pick it up. Right? Secondly, sometimes when you don't have this informal mechanism, a formal mechanism is required as well. And in countries where there's weak capacity for coordination, and the Pacific Islands is a great example, it's so diverse, dispersed across so many countries, the capacity to coordinate may not be there for the government. So ADB has developed something called the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, which is meant exactly to do that. Right, to bring donors together, to coordinate on day-to-day activities, see where processes can be aligned as well. Right? Sometimes every donor sometimes has a different coordination mechanism, and we have great examples of that in Tonga, where the ministry actually said that World Bank, ADB, can you guys come together and have a common safeguard facility, process rather than separate ones, because we're not able to do that. So that kind of alludes to the second point where leadership matters. And quality matters, of course, is at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to do a tough job, right? So much of that depends on personality, and so much of it depends on willingness and passion to be working. And I don't think anyone here in this room will say that I don't have the passion to work in this field. I think that's important to confront, to be able to then address the quality issue as well. I hope that was real enough, Robert. Thank you for inspiring me.
Thanks, Vivek. That's great. And we're really grateful that all of our speakers are focusing on concrete, specific examples, that we're not operating at the high level, that we're hearing very specific examples. I'd like to move us from the multilaterals to a bilateral, to Lisa Rudge of FCDO. If you could tell us a bit about the WASH Systems for Health program and how active coordination with host governments really drove the design in addition to the implementation of that program.
Thanks, Jeff. And I think Vivek was stealing from my notes, because my first point was about leadership. No, I'm joking. But I just wanted to start off by saying, maybe perhaps as well, that from a bilateral point of view, of course, where possible, we would align with kind of the government, with a national program, with pooled funds, and that would be kind of an ideal situation where possible. But it's not always possible. Different funding mechanisms, different countries, different contexts, and so on. And so I think with the WASH Systems for Health program, it was a bit more experimental. So we moved away from kind of direct delivery of services. 60 million people reached between 2010 and 2019 with water and sanitation services. I didn't say sustainable. And the big question was, how do we maintain those? And we know, the sustainability issues in the sector. So then the question was, how do we go about system strengthening? What are our priorities in system strengthening? Who leads on those priorities, and how do we align with them? And so to the first point around leadership, I think our first kind of reflection was, we need a process in which we can go to governments and ask, what are your priorities? Which of the building blocks, or what are the priorities? Is it financing? Is it which part of financing is it? Is it policy? Is it service delivery models? What kind of things would you want us to support you on? And I think that's the second point. It's around partnership. This isn't something that any of us can do alone. So it was really about identifying where the strengths are, perhaps, of this particular funding stream, or of kind of the partners who we might work with later. So the second question we asked government was also, what are the types of technical support that you might need, and try and kind of categorize those. So just to say that concretely what came out of that is a lot around service delivery models in rural water supply, sanitation marketing, and a lot around wash and healthcare facilities, which brings me a little bit to this kind of multi-sector point. So, you know, in defining the priorities, it was important to understand that it wasn't just water sector or sanitation, but that we also spoke to the health sector, to ministries of environment as well, to understand kind of where those intersect. So to my next point, which is actually that dialogue is really important. So going back to why we support HOSI as well, as was said this morning, setting those priorities at the highest level of government will help kind of also align priorities throughout that system. And that's really important to us. I think my final point is around learning. So I think we can't, work on system strengthening without having an adaptive system in which we can implement, we can learn from the implementation, we understand how things work, what works, but that learning needs to happen at the national level, together with our government stakeholders and the partners who are working on system strengthening. Sorry for my voice, I have a cold, but thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Lisa. Really appreciate it. Okay, I think we're moving ahead nicely so we can preserve time for Q&A here. So we'll now move to Latin America and the Caribbean with Sergio from IDB. Sergio, again, in the spirit of keeping it real, we have to acknowledge that there are barriers and transaction costs for good coordination. If you could share examples for how you align these incentives, but not only across organizations, but within organizations. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this session and for keeping it real. This is one of the reasons why we come to CIWI, because in CIWI we can not only learn from what other organizations and other regions are doing, but we can share what we have been doing. I'm going to tell you a story of the bank for the last 15 years and the type of partnerships that we've structured and how far we've come along. This is something we're very proud of. 15 years ago, with the government of Spain, we said in the rural sector there are not lessons learned, there are lessons not learned. And we made the point of internalizing those lessons and create something special. We gathered the interest of the government of Switzerland, Japan, and Austria, and we created a program to benefit 14 countries in the rural sector. Not only that, we were all able to manage and leverage resources from One Drop, the NGO of Cirque du Soleil, the Coca-Cola Foundation, PepsiCo Foundation, and FEMSA Foundation, and we gathered the interest of all the NGOs that worked in Latin America, Water for People, WaterAid, World Vision, CARE, and we've been working also with the SCAT Foundation. What were the barriers that we encountered at the beginning? Aligning our bureaucracies and our politics was very difficult. Everyone has its way of doing things. Everyone has the type of audit, the type of monitoring, the type of indicators that they want to collect. So aligning was very difficult. Then coordination during preparation and the execution was also very difficult because everyone has its own processes, its own missions, its own visits, its own consulting firms that want to participate. The turnaround of the specialists that are in the country that prepare the projects were also very difficult to encounter because we always had to be training and retraining the people. And sometimes the governments would have preferred for us not to be aligned. They would have preferred for us to work separately because in that way they could do different things in the way they wanted. So those are the challenges to keeping it real. The benefits. We were able to leverage a contribution of 600 million into 1.5 billion. We were able to leverage from $10 million of technical cooperation, $50 million cooperation from the private sector, from the NGOs, and from the other governments. Instead of only doing access, we were working on behavioral change through the social arts. One Drop was contributed that. The government of Switzerland motivated us to work on innovation, on regulation, in training, in inter-exchange of knowledge between the different regions. and to work seriously in gender and in connectivity. The other benefits that we encounter is that when supervision came along, we were aligned. So there was a lot of cost savings, like you were mentioning. You can save in your supervision because you're aligned. And then we were able to build consensus with the government, and not only build a national policy, but a regional policy, because the reality is that the similarities between some of our countries are a lot of our countries share a lot of similarities. Their differences are not where they are located, but in the different ecological platforms and they coexist. And then the cross-fertilization of knowledge. Because of all of that, 4 years ago, we decided to build a call to action that motivated us to think about a rural sector that needs to be well planned, a rural sector that needs to be tailor-made and with appropriate solutions to the conditions that the rural sector has, and to dream about a rural sector that could be resilient, productive, and healthy. And that call to action, we're actually trying to share with some of our other MDBs so that we can work together on that.
Oh, thank you, Sergio. I think we're now going to go to Q&A. Yeah, we're on time, don't you think? Yeah.
Yes, so we have here the esteemed panelists. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around the room. Anyone? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Arjun. I'm a graduate student currently. And my question was based on the theme of the panel today, which is investing in rural sector for water. It's great to see there's so much work and so much interest by MDBs in water and sanitation. I think it was long overdue. But also when it comes to rural sector, agriculture is the elephant in the room. It takes 80 to 90% of the water. And I was just wondering, is it in the agriculture sector, is it difficult to have any intervention because you have to sort of also look at aligning priorities with the government, and it tends to be a very entrenched political economy. So is it difficult to sort of develop interventions in that, when we look at agriculture? And the second part was, once the project has been run by development banks with their partners, how do we build capacity once the development banks exit the project so that the government's, the project is sustainable itself once the funding and the development aid gets over? So if you can speak a little on what happens beyond development aid.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we get 2 more questions and then we pass back to the panel. So anyone else with a question for the panelists? And please, if you have questions for Lilian as well, Lilian, you could perhaps join us up here. Anyone else in the room? Yes, please.
Hi, thanks to a really interesting panel. I'm Rick Johnston from WHO, Joint Monitoring Program. And I think the Ethiopia One Wash program is a great example of coordination. It's famous for that. WASREB, also NOWASCO, are really exemplar examples of regulation and improving service delivery through independent regulators. And Uganda is famous for having joint sector reviews going back a long time. So I guess my question is, are these islands of success and brilliance? I mean, why don't we see more countries with one washes? Or maybe there are, and we just don't hear about them as much. But what's preventing, success outside of these star performers?
Okay, thank you very much. One last question for this first round, and maybe audience that is online, you can put your questions also through the chat box, and we'll read a couple of them at the end. Yes?
Thank you so much. I'm Linga Miho from Malawi. I'm interested in the presentation that was done by the official from government from Uganda, and citing one of the challenges to be CSO resistance towards coordination. I wonder what's beneath that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we can start with this last question with Lilian, and then we can move.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start, with him. Yes, the successes of the joint sector reviews. I think the joint sector reviews were started in Uganda, and they were very successful. I think Kenya, I don't know if there's anybody, yeah, my colleague is from Kenya. So Kenya joined, and a number of other countries joined. But I think the support for holding the joint sector reviews was more from the development partners. And as the development partner focus moved from water to other sectors, that's why I mentioned the program, the annual program reviews these days are not as vibrant as they were when the donors were supporting it. So I think it's something we need to learn from, and maybe government should, come in. Now, the civil society organizations, the reason why we formed that umbrella organization called Uganda Water and Sanitation, WASNET, it was actually to bring together these civil society organizations. Before, it was difficult. Up to now, sometimes it's difficult to know. Unfortunately, there are some organizations that would just come into the country and move direct to the local governments and the districts, and the central government wouldn't know that there are these organizations that are also into WASH activities. But with WASNET, things have improved, although I think more can be done. But what they need is just a bit of resources to be able to follow these civil society organizations so that they can report, and maybe some bit of, the carrot, some bit of penalties also, some maybe not incentives, disincentives. So that, yes, if you do not submit the reports, then maybe the district should be given the mandate, maybe to send you out of the district. But it's also very important that they are registered so that they align to the priorities of government. Because we are talking about equitable sharing of the resource and equity, but when you go to some districts, because some civil society organizations choose where to go, then you find when we talk about water coverage, there's no equity, because you find so many CSOs in one district, and some districts are left unserved, some population are left unserved. So yes, I think we are going to maybe introduce some penalties to try and follow up the civil society organizations better. But we at least have that umbrella organization that is following them and is doing a good job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sergio? The first question. In regards to the first question, two of the lessons learned that we gathered were that when working in the rural sector, the water is not only needed for water consumption, it's also needed to raise cattle and for agriculture. And when you go only with the water and sanitation program, if you don't do local rural development, the communities weren't able to generate enough revenues to be able to pay the tariffs. So the interventions need to be more holistic. It's not only water, it's maybe energy, it may be rural roads, and it may be also helping them with techniques in agriculture, different type of irrigation, or in terms of cattle, allocate resources of water to provide that for that too. That was one of the lessons not learned in rural projects. And the other one was, we used to build infrastructure and then have to refurbish it 3 or 4 years later. In fact, I mean, most of rural infrastructure after 3 years need to be rehabilitated. And that was because we needed to tackle behavioral change. People were having the facilities, but they were not using it properly. Why? Because we were training them, or we were transmitting good practices, but not in a language that they understand, and not within their culture. That's why we started looking at behavioral change through the social arts, in which we identify the behaviors that needed to change for cleaning water, for boiling water, for hand washing. And then we inspire them, we identify the behaviors, and then sustain them through the time. No, so those were the things that we did.
Sorry, just a quick one. So while we're having the panelists responding to the rest of the questions, we wanted to let you know that you can engage also on the Mentimeter poll to tell us what do you think hinders cooperative approaches? What do you think promotes cooperative approaches from your own experience? And if you have examples of other countries, other programs that coordination is working well, feel free to scan and respond as we hear to other panelists responding. So, Sarah?
Thank you. So I'll respond to the question on, are these kind of oasis of examples that was raised on, there are some examples that we have some good examples, but I think it comes back to maybe what Vivek said is nobody walks into the room saying they don't want to coordinate. But what coordination takes is capacity and resources. And if it's not resourced, if people don't have the time to coordinate, then sometimes it is just talk. It's it's a discussion over at the pub. So, but one of the things that we're trying to do at the World Bank is we're trying to take and work with our partners on longer term projects. So as I mentioned, for the Ethiopia One Wash platform, there was a shift where the government was no longer taking project by project planning, but they were looking at a more programmatic approach. So we're taking a more programmatic approach when we work with our clients. So Nancy was talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo. So as an example, the World Bank has just approved a project, a 10-year project. So this is a 10-year commitment to the country, multi-phased for $1.8 billion. So what we're going to be doing as part of that project is we're going to be supporting the development and implementation of a country-led platform. We're working with USAID, we're working with UNICEF, we're working with the German government, and we're going to work and actually provide project funding so that the government can develop this platform, and have the leadership, and then hopefully we will be able to also bring in more resources and reduce the fragmentation.
Awesome. Just very brief remarks. 1 minute. Yeah.
One good thing about keeping us standing is you have to talk quickly. My feet are hurting. I think, you have to always consider that the partnerships are always two-way, right? We as multilateral banks are also held accountable by our financial partners who are giving us money, right? So a lot of that comes through discussions when you're trying to when you want to replicate a one wash, say, in Asia. We also are accountable to our government. So we have country partnership strategies that lay out 5-year roadmap for how, say, an ADB is going to engage in the government. So there's a big picture. We're not doing these things in isolation, right? So it's important to kind of be able to then say, how do you replicate? And then the other thing is we also have MDB water coordination group. Sergio and I, we meet quite regularly across time zones, as annoyed as I am at 11 p.m. at night. But it does happen, right? We do learn about these things. And then there is a whole bunch of mechanisms that have to kick into place for us to be able to then take a one wash and bring it into an Asia. And I think a lot of willingness is there, but like you've said, like competing strategies, competing priorities sometimes do get in the way. But I think a good check in the system is our financial partners who hold us accountable and want us to take good practices from point A to point B.
Thank you. Engineer Gakubia, 1 minute.
Yes, just a quick one to comment on something about islands of success and all that. I think the point was made here that people are at the center of this. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So the fact that, for example, you have joint sector review in Uganda succeeding, or WASREB and WASCO, there are people involved. And I think the problem is in both sides, both at the partner level and also at the mandated institution level. You as partners must actually be delivering the message from the mandated institutions. I remember partners used to come to my office. They have already promised some entity money, and that entity has no license. So they cannot be accountable. So if you are going to do that, and you have to be very strict, you cannot be supporting a water utility that needs to account for whatever it's doing to the regulator, and they don't have a license, and they think that they can continue getting the money. I said, okay, if you want to proceed with the money like that, that's fine. But don't come to ask us about accountability. Because as a regulator, I'm the one who should actually be answering about accountability for the sector. Because I've committed the utilities to signing something. If they don't deliver, and I was never involved, then you cannot come back and say the government of Kenya is not accountable for the funds we are giving them. It cannot be like that. And I think from that time, and I'm saying this with the permission of somebody I saw here who is acting CEO of WASREP, I told him, you can blame me if there is something that... I'm a private citizen now. So it is important for partners to also agree the part they play in weakening governance. They also weaken a bit of that governance by not actually responding to one program by the mandated institution. This will take time. It is not a matter of ticking boxes, but it will take time, but it is something we have to do for the sector to progress. I thank the person who came up with that iceberg example. What you see is so little, but the things are out there. That is what regulators do. And they don't make many friends. Perhaps they don't even make it.
You have friends here, Engineer Gakubia. Lisa, we're going to wind up. If there was any last remarks before we go to the second panel. Go ahead.
Just the last remark is, I think, we're reporting on SDG 6. SDG 6 has several components. And I think when we look at some of the fragmentation in the sector as well may come from just us kind of thinking in those silos. So I think to your point on kind of agriculture and all the other sectors, I mean, it's also for us, in our own institutions to make sure to bridge those gaps and acknowledge that, nothing's always perfect and that we have those challenges ourselves as well. And then how we dialogue with and national governments and other partners is super important, but I think that point has largely been made. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. How about a hand for this great panel and for your questions? Thanks so much. So, yeah, please.
Okay, we're right on schedule, and we'll move on to the next panel, which will be focused now on the topic of peace and security. I'll invite the panelists up, please. And while you're coming up, I'll read off the introductions. We have Diane Arjun, Principal Rural Water Security Officer at the African Water Facility of the African Development Bank. Next is Brian Hoyer, Chief Water Programs Officer at Charity Water. Third is Arnaud de Vancey, Team Leader Water at the European Commission. And finally, we have Jorge Alvarez Sala, Wash Specialist, Water Supply Sustainability at UNICEF. Diane, I'm going to keep this simple and go in order. So we begin with you. What I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about is how can governments play a coordinating role for donor-funded rural water development to ensure the best outcomes? And specifically, can you tell us about your experience with African Development Bank investments in Chad?
Sure. Is this working? Yeah. I'm probably going to touch a little bit on things that everybody has already said, which is sort of a good sign. So first, we've all heard in the last couple of days that water is a trigger for ongoing conflicts within borders in certain countries. And the Sahel region in Africa is one of these regions that has a lot of conflicts due to water. And these conflicts come from a number of different sources. It's a region that traditionally has a lot of pastoral livelihoods, and they have normally complemented the farmers that also live in the area. And it's generally been very peaceful. However, over the past few decades, due to things such as climate change, dwindling water resources, and competition from growing populations, this has changed, and there have been conflicts that have sometimes been violent and deadly. And there's also, in these countries, there's a lot of displaced populations coming from other countries that are also under violence and conflict. So currently, there's a number of donors that support efforts in water supply and sanitation in the Sahel countries. And many of the governments in these countries have a system to coordinate the donors at the national level. However, one role that the government can play to ensure better outcomes is by building national structures of actionable information to inform decision-making. when it comes to these programs. One example is for mapping donor contributions and to better understand where these donors are being, where the resources are being invested, and being able to coordinate the funding. It's important to have up-to-date, nuanced information on things such as the socio-ecological systems at play in these countries as well, in order to understand really what's going on. Try a little faster. So at the African Development Bank, there are several programs focused on these fragile countries in the Sahel and the drivers of social fragility within these countries. And Chad is among one of the countries that regularly faced community conflicts that really constitute real factors of fragility in the country. So the bank has an ongoing program since about 2018 for water supply and sanitation in 11 regions in Chad, which is intended to be an instrument to contribute to reducing exclusion from access to water resources in order to build social cohesion in the country. So the plan for this, the second phase of the project, is to build water and sanitation infrastructure that will help to reduce competition between the farmers and the pastoralists for limited water resources and to supply services for increasing populations. Now, the government of Chad has a structure to coordinate the donor fundings at the national level, which includes the Ministry of Economy and Development Planning, which interfaces between the sector ministries and the technical and financial partners. Each individual project has its own steering committee, but there's an overall umbrella called the Technical Monitoring Committee, which oversees all of the projects in the sector. And there are also structures at the regional and provincial levels, but at the local level, there are commissions and committees that include local representatives, water users, farmers, women, that are responsible for monitoring the activities on the ground and providing information back up to the national levels. So this type of vertical structure ensures that the integral actors in a sector are involved overall, and that the whole structure from the government down to the local level have the same information to use when making decisions for the sector. However, there is still a lack of actionable data and information for which to be able to use to coordinate these programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I'll echo what Jeff said, that it's so important to have these specific examples, and I think in your case, an actual recommendation for something that we can all contribute to, such as improving the availability of data that everybody can use. Thanks again. Brian, I'll move on to you then and ask, how has Charity Water supported rural wash programming changed following conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia? And what lessons has Charity Water learned during the recovery period? I believe you have a couple of images that you also want to show.
All right, thank you, Ranjiv. Hi, everybody. So I was originally going to be on panel 1, and then a few weeks ago, I went to Ethiopia. That's why I decided to put up a photo from a few weeks ago, and we reconfigured. So we talked together, and I actually think that this is a good example that fits into peace and why WASH needs to change, and funders and partners, and we all have to pay attention and change. So I have an example that I'm highlighting from Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. I see some familiar faces here, probably online. Charity Water is a nonprofit organization based in the States, and we don't work in conflict areas. So you might be wondering, okay, where's she going with this? But we have worked in Tigray region since 2013, invested more than $85 million. We have 8,000 plus projects, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens when conflict arrives in a place where we have partnered with our partner, REST, the Relief Society for the People of Tigray, and that's what I want to highlight. So I think that gives us our lessons in that example. I chatted with our partner, of course, before this and got their consent to kind of share a lot of these lessons that are coming from them. So I think the first step is adaptation. So of course, we were focused on rural water access and a lot of investment over time and really focused on new projects along with sustaining past projects. we had to totally reconfigure that. So conflict arrived in this region. I'm not going to recap the whole conflict in a couple minutes, but there's a big change. We saw a 40 percentage point drop in the functionality of rural water points. So that's pipe systems, that's hand pumps, major drop after, for us, more than a decade working together, our partner even longer. And other indicators out there, which I think are important to pay attention to as we're talking about water, sanitation, and hygiene, maternal mortality ratio dropped to, or increased to what it was at more than 20 years ago. So just take that as another proxy indicator to give you a bit of a sample. So we have to change. The program has to look at the facts, talk to people, listen to our partner, and adapt. So that seems pretty straightforward. So what are we doing now? What have we done in the last couple of years since the cessation of hostilities agreement was signed? And we took all funding for new projects, shifted it to rehabilitation of water services. So that adaptability, but then what else are we doing in that? We focused on a program, I think this is a program that I want to talk about here, that we've been incrementally building with our partner over years. It's called Wahasmai. That means protecting water, or various translations. It can be guaranteeing water or guarantor of water. But this program also was built around a sustainability model. So this is where it might get a little more interesting, because I'm so far just saying some things that you may already know. But the sustainability model was about washcos, different kind of local actors, including local government, district, Tabia government, Waredas, the entire region. Lots of involvement at that level, but those institutions lost all of their availability of funds, their ability to save, their backup, whether it's in the form of a chicken or cash. The backup institutions were also no longer present. So we also adapted to a more humanitarian program. So the subsidies went up for covering costs for spare parts. The service was provided by our partner, and we expanded that. So we increased the number of teams in a time when lots of other programs were decreasing, and refocused them. So really focused in on geographies. Not all areas are accessible still, but really focusing on what is safe and available, and then going deeper and more focused. And then I think what else is kind of interesting, a couple things to highlight briefly. I think changing the things that we're measuring, so changing the targets, including in those targets, what % of involvement do we want from all the different stakeholders? So whether it's a local technician, a regional government official, realistic targets. So we're not aiming for 100% right away. So again, I'm kind of talking about incremental changes in the recovery process. Targets around data, improving data collection. So monitoring was another key lesson that we learned. Change the monitoring strategy, collect different data, create different dashboards, and move forward with that to keep it on point and learn how that adaptation is working. I think from our partner, my last comment, I think that they wanted me to highlight the link between trauma that it's experienced in a conflict. How does that focus on water become empowerment? That is empowerment that is tangible, and that can move a community towards a different kind of hope and peace. These are all things that sound pretty lofty, but they really matter when you're talking to people on the ground. So I think we can move forward, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I don't know if we really planned this, but I find it interesting that we're looking at water in the context of peace and security from two perspectives. Diane talking about how investments can be used to promote stability, and Brian emphasizing the importance of investments when there is instability and responding to that. So I think important, another validation for what we do, more validation. Arnaud, I'll move to you then and ask you to tell us about coordination in the water, energy, food ecosystem nexus and how it can support efforts for peace and stabilities. And specifically, what is the role of government and water basin organizations in bringing people together, particularly donors? And how is this being done in Europe? I think it'll be nice to have an example from here.
Okay. I didn't thought about talking about Europe, but I could.
I'm sorry, I surprised you with that one.
No worries. Just why do we talk about the WEFE, or the Nexus, while we talk about WASH? And I was listening to Jorge this morning, and he was saying, okay, we need to go to prevent, to work on the resilience of the WASH system. And so how do we develop WASH resilience system, basically? And in front of water scarcity, how do you manage the water scarcity? If you don't look at energy and food production, you can't do that. So this is why we bring in this water ecosystem food nexus. And there was this program that we financed with GIZ, the Frexus program in the Sahel, that tried to really look at different methodologies to include conflict sensitivity analysis and climate risk assessments. So you have a full set of guidelines that have been developed in this context to really look at this overall program and context to make sure that we can have an impact on a resilient WASH system that is put in place that is looking at all the different factors that are there. And for that, you need the data, the analysis, the diagnostic that you can use. And we have done a lot of work around that, notably through the joint research session of the Commission, using satellite data, working with river basin organizations, etc. So there are plenty of information on the Nexus Knowledge platform that is really looking at this and how it can impact the WASH resilience and the WASH access in the rural areas. And I think this is a powerful mechanism. And there were a couple of conclusions, or let's say key factors that were mentioned by the program, notably mainstreaming this WEF approach, including security in the WEF approach and this Nexus approach when it is necessary, because if you don't include the conflict sensitivity analysis, then you will not manage to implement this Nexus approach. And then after, monitor the conflicts around the natural resources to prevent the problems instead of reacting to the problems, and so that's super important also. And you have tools now that allows you to monitor these conflicts, because you have all the conflicts that are popping up on the maps and you can monitor the occurrence of the conflicts, and from there you can really try to target the critical areas where you know that there will be potential problems. And I think that can be super powerful. And then cooperate with river basin organizations. They are the core. In Europe, for instance, they are the core of the water framework directives. It's the core of the water framework directive is the river basin management plan with the water agencies and river basin organizations, because everything has to begin with the people, together with the people, with the discussion about what are we going to do with this water. And even in Europe, I'm working in Belgium, and in Belgium is a water scarce country today. Well, it's raining the whole day, I can tell you. I mean, it's coming from there, and it's raining. We have been the worst weather ever. But still, it's considered water scarce because you have so many people, and you need to bring all these people together. And everywhere, this has to start with that. And then after, you also have to raise awareness about on the connection between natural resources, because sometimes we forget about it, but the understanding of nature as a connected world is coming from Humboldt only. Yeah? So it's only 100 years ago, or 200 years maybe now, no, a bit less, 150 years ago, that we really understood that the planet is all connected and things are interconnected. And it's not something that is super easy to understand for a local person living in an area, in local community. So you really have, and even some ministers that are not or people that working in ministries that are not trained as environmental people, they may not get this understanding. So I think it's something that you always need to bring back on the table to raise awareness on this connection, so that the people make the connection between what's happening here and there and begin to think together and accept to talk and to solve the problem. So that's that's what I can say for now, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think you're talking about considering WASH in broader context with respect to, in this case, peace. It reminds me what Sergio was saying as well about the importance of looking at rural water development holistically. Again, not very novel concepts, but not always something that we apply. I mean, when I think about the work we do under Real Water, the research, I would argue that's an area that we can certainly improve in, is thinking beyond our specific topics of water improvement. Thank you, Arnaud. Jorge, we'll end with you, and I just also want to acknowledge Jorge as a member of the Real Water Advisory Board and the inputs he provides there. Jorge, so I'll ask you, how are peace and security objectives considered during program development at UNICEF? And then specifically, can you speak about the WASH for Peace guidelines?
Yes. So allow me to start saying that UNICEF works in over 100 countries with WASH programs. However, a little bit more than 90% of our results globally are coming from the 60 OECD fragile countries. So we know a little bit about fragility, conflict, protracted crisis, humanitarian crisis, etc. But I have 4 minutes, and I would like to, because we want to keep it real, I want to give 3 examples and 1 commercial. So I will start with the first example. Many of you may know, but one of the root causes of the conflict in Darfur 20 years ago was a conflict between 2 ethnic groups competing for water sources, pastoralists and agriculturalists. And 20 years later, we're still facing a very severe humanitarian crisis in Darfur and in the rest of the country in Sudan. So that shows that often as a WASH sector, we work in our own silo, we are protected, we work in an environment and we blame politicians or we blame the economy or we blame the conflict, but sometimes water is at the origin of many conflicts. And what we see in the world is a growing number of conflicts where water plays an important role. So this is something that we have to be aware, because I think this is only growing in more and more countries. Allow me to move very quickly to the second example. The second example is not necessarily coming from UNICEF, so I'm not mentioning the country, I'm not mentioning the organization, but this is an example that I know well, so I can only be blamed myself because I was around. This is a rural water supply system. The day before the cutting ribbon ceremony with all the local authorities and all the, the big people, the main pipeline was cut. And the community was very embarrassed, of course, and they did an investigation. And what they found is that the water tankers that were supplying water to those communities were boycotting the infrastructure that was benefiting them, but of course at the same time was affecting significantly the livelihoods of several families. So this is something that I think as a sector we usually do not share the lessons learned, the negative lessons learned, or the lessons not learned. I think it's something that happens more often than we want to believe. And I think it's good to put these type of things on the table. And going back to what Arnaud was mentioning, doing a conflict-sensitive analysis can help preventing these type of things from happening, or preventing, communities that feel affected because you are drilling a new borehole and all of a sudden, we don't know if it's related or not, the community nearby experience some drop in the yield in their other water source. So these are things that I think we need to pay much more attention. So I'm moving to the third one very, very quickly. This is a positive one from UNICEF, of course, yes. In Lebanon, UNICEF was able to develop a program in which 2 communities that have been in conflict for different reasons share the same area, the same small basin, and because the water source was shared by those 2 communities, we needed to bring these 2 communities together. And the management of their source, the management of the infrastructure has been shared and has been a source of, I would say, reduction of conflict among those 2 communities that are experiencing severe conflict for other reasons. So water is, in many cases, and more, a source of conflict, but also water can be a source of peace building, and contribution. And there are many examples. Allow me maybe to just give another example. In Ethiopia, as that was already mentioned, there are some, well, in many parts of Eastern Africa nowadays, host communities receiving large numbers of refugees are benefiting from infrastructures and services that they would not dream of living in a rural community, but because they are hosting refugee camps or IDP camps nearby, they are benefiting from these kind of expanded services to refugees and host communities. So those are tangible benefits that we need to put in value. We need to identify properly. So at the end of the day, it comes to better WASH programming. And again, we can be part of the problem or we can be part of the solution. And the last one, super quickly, the commercial. So UNICEF developed WASH conflict sensitivity analysis tool and a guidance document is online. If you Google UNICEF WASH Peace, you should be able to get access to the website where we have the document. It's a bit long, sorry for that, but I believe that it contains a lot of useful practical examples that you can use in your programming. So I hope I didn't exceed the 4 minutes. Thank you.
Jorge, I think it was important for you to sort of end this on a positive note, which you did very nicely. Our work is hard, so it's good to get some encouragement, and with an important resource. I hope, those are always welcome. I will say that I'll ask for maybe 2 questions. We have really about 5 minutes before we have to end. So I'll ask for 2 audience questions for the panel before we wrap it up. It looks like we have one over here.
Hello, thanks for the panel. My name's Adrienne Lane. I work with Water for Good. And I had a question about one of the themes you brought up, Brian. How have you seen sustainable service delivery as a tool for peace building? And I know, Brian, you shared a bit of an example, but could you talk more about the mechanism and if any others have something to share? Thank you.
Do we have one more before we... In the back there, my boss.
Thanks. I'm Rachel Pellets from the Quiet Institute. I have a question for Diane. At the end of your talk, you talked about data and information that's lacking. And I would love you to elaborate more on that, on exactly what we can do as a sector to improve data and information. Thanks.
So I think, Diane, I'll ask you to start on that very specific question related to improving data availability. And I will ask if you could just maybe keep it to a minute and a half before we go to the next one.
I will do. Sorry, I'm so used to it with talking just like that. Thank you for the question. I think one of the issues with data and information gathering, or these systems that can help for decision making in all of these countries or in regions, especially in Africa, one of the main issues is that the donors are more concerned with these hard investments and infrastructure because there's a return of investment. There is, it's something tangible. The more soft investments and are rarely touched with respect to donors. And it also requires, I think, a lot of capacity with respect to the government itself, because that data has to be stored, that data has to be used, that data has to be collected, and you don't want to spend money on collecting the same data for different donors. So there's really a tangled web to untangle there, but I think that is one of the main issues that we see in a lot of the countries, is that you just don't have the funding for those types of projects. And when you have things like grants and trust funds, for instance, they have their own agenda that they want to fund, and often it has nothing to do with data and information for these. It's more the hard investments that they prefer. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
You left us with a lot of work still to do. I know. Brian, I think you have the floor to answer Adrian's question.
Okay, I think that my first entry into it is during times when there is not peace. I think water is used as a thing to interrupt. Continuous water supply is a target. So whether it's intentional or whether it's through disrepair, lack of preventative maintenance, when that supply is disrupted, it increases conflict. When in times of peace, mechanisms that bring water supply back, so that's why I think the focus on rebuilding, doing an activity together, that sounds like I'm a school teacher, but doing something together rebuilds trust. Trust leads to peace. I think any activity like that, I think people should talk to Adrienne too. She's working in Central African Republic, so if there's mechanisms for sustainability in a tough, fragile location, I think you guys have proven that through continuous effort, you can really keep things cohesive and trust there. It can be done. That's my positive note.
That's the positive ending. Thanks so much again, everyone. And with that, I think we are good.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Dana Hansberger, and I'm the Senior Program and Operations Manager with Aquia as part of the Real Water Consortium. So first, a huge thank you again to all of our panelists, our opening speakers, and all of you for taking time out of your conference agenda to attend here or online. I have the challenging task of summarizing the many insights from this session in less than a minute. So I will, I will do my best to pull just a few highlights that you heard today that hopefully can go along with any others that you took a particular note of as you go back to your work. So one thing that we heard is that the benefit of coordination is not only in supporting the actual programmatic efforts, but in reduced transaction costs. Another element was the example given in Vietnam, where simply picking up the phone to call another development bank salvaged an important project. And I think that really speaks to the sometimes small but very important gestures that can be made to facilitate this coordination. And then lastly, I think we heard from multiple panelists about the importance of using data and databases to actually track actors and support coordination, but also to track the conflict itself. And critically, not only using that data, but supporting through funding and through other mechanisms to actually generate and store it and manage it properly, because the data, if it doesn't exist, isn't usable, and if it's not managed correctly, also isn't usable. So just to close us out, I encourage you to visit the Real Water Project at the USAID exhibition booth. We have a few QR codes up on this slide that you can continue to explore the Real Water Project's research. We also just released a new podcast episode on climate resilience, drought, and WASH as of less than 10 hours ago. So it is hot off the presses, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.